So I do want to point out she's really an accomplished artist and writer that is someone that is really worth paying attention to and reading what she does. So Dionne, yes, she's the author of Go Back and Get It, this brand new book that was in People magazine. Thank you very much. And also, she's one of the two editors of Slavery's Descendants, which is the anthology that was published 4 years ago, I think, 2019. And it's 25 or 30 different stories written by various people within Coming to the Table and published by Rutgers University Press. Dionne's been involved with Coming to the Table for a long time. She helped lead the New York chapter for a number of years and is just a really terrific person. We're really proud to have her here this evening. So, warm welcome for Dionne Ford.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for having me here. It's a real honor to speak to you on the opening night of Coming to the Table's National Gathering in 2023. It being the first in-person gathering since the world halted in 2020 makes this invitation extra special to me. Coming to the Table has been an important part of my process and journey of learning about my family's history of slavery, reclaiming the stories of the enslaved members of my family, and then honoring those stories by documenting them in the memoir that I just published. It's also allowed me to be a part of bringing the stories of other descendants of slavery to a wider audience by co-editing with Jill Strauss the collection of Coming to the Table members' stories, Slavery's Descendants, which Tom was just discussing. All of this, for me, is about honoring and remembering the ancestors. Also, all about strengthening our ancestral kinship, as is our theme. And to me, that's the spirit of Sankofa. Sankofa, as many of you probably already know, comes from the Akan people of Ghana, and it means go back and get it, roughly. That's where the title of my memoir comes from. And that's what my book is about, going back and getting the story of my ancestors in order to heal and move forward. And Sankofa is what calls us to this gathering today. Finding the enslaved women in my family, their descendants, and the rest of my family's history, which includes enslavers, was deeply clarifying and restorative, and long. It took a long time. My interest in my family's history started when I was 12, and my grandfather came to visit our family in New Jersey from his home in New Orleans. And even though I had visited with my grandpa many, many times, this was really the first time I noticed how different his skin looked from the rest of my family. He was very fair, and for the first time, I don't know if it was because at 12 you're starting to, just develop your own sense of yourself more so, starting to think about your identity and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of intrigued, and I asked him if he was white, because he looked like a white man. And he said that he wasn't, but that his grandfather was. And that's when he told me the story of his grandparents. Colonel W.R. Stewart, a white pecan farmer, and Tempe Burton, a woman who worked on Stewart's plantation, as my grandfather put it. I didn't know a lot about slavery, because I really didn't learn hardly anything about slavery in school, but I knew enough about history to figure that at some point the grandmother he was talking about had probably been a slave and not just a worker. And I've been learned that I was right about that, and that indeed Tempe was enslaved to Stuart, and that my grandpa's mother, Josephine, was their youngest child. I wasn't quite ready at 12 to start researching and going to archives and doing all the necessary things, but the seed was planted in me, and without really having intended to, I took the first step of researching by getting our family's oral history. That was the gift that my grandpa gave to me that day by sharing his stories. He really gave me all of the vital information I would need later to move forward and really find those stories. So I'm always so grateful to my grandpa for taking some time with a very nosy 12-year-old to just talk to me, as honestly as he could be about something that I know was painful for him. I loved hearing people's stories, which is probably why I went on to be a journalist. But I especially loved hearing my grandparents talk about their lives growing up in Arkansas and Oklahoma and Mississippi and Louisiana. My mom's parents were sharecroppers, and they had to leave school in order to help with the family farming. My granddad entered the military in order to get out of the Jim Crow South. The way he put it was to not be a slave anymore. Even though he was not technically a slave, he felt like one. And he used the service to get a leg up, and to have more of a middle-class life. But I didn't hear any of that history really reflected in school. I didn't really see my family's part in this American experiment at all when I went to my classrooms, but my classmates' stories were really reflected. So I always felt like there was something missing. And most of what I learned about slavery in the United States, I learned in college. I paid for that education. Even though I was studying journalism, I took as many classes in African American history as I could. Many of those classes I felt like were classes I should have learned, probably in middle school, at least in high school. But my parents were willing to pay for college, and I was allowed to pick my classes, so I figured, well, I'm here, I'm gonna find out what I can, and so I did. In college, I learned that race was a social construct and not rooted in biology. That was new to me. I took biology, could have learned that in 7th grade, probably. Turns out we're all something like 99.99999% the same. I learned that the first laws in this country linked slavery to race and decided who a black woman's children would belong to. I read slave narratives in college that I would have liked to have read a lot sooner by women who had been enslaved, like Harriet Jacobs. And I began to learn something alarming. Not only was this country built on the unpaid labor of enslaved black people, but it was also built on the systemic rape of black women. This legacy persists. Indigenous American women have the highest rate of sexual assault in this country, but that's followed by black women. According to Department of Justice statistics from 2005 to 2010, black girls and women experience higher rates of rape and sexual assault than white, Asian, and Latina girls and women. And unfortunately, that's a legacy that lives with so many people that I know, including me. I graduated from college, went to work at a newspaper, a TV network, and all the while I tried to lift up the stories that were hidden as much as I could. I was able to do a story at NBC about Black Civil War soldiers, which was so exciting to me, who had fought for the Union Army, while also all the while still trying to find information about my own ancestors. So in between that job, I would also attend genealogy workshops. The Schomburg had a wonderful workshop that I was so excited about. I visited the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They had actually a satellite there in Manhattan that was not too far from my apartment. I did, everything that I could. I sent away for records, death certificates, all sorts of stuff during this research. But I was quickly overwhelmed and discouraged because enslaved people were really just difficult to find. They're not listed with their names, their gender. It's often just as property. And so even though I had all this training in, journalism, like I was a reporter, I find stuff out, but I couldn't find anything about my own family, and it was very, very disheartening. It was daunting. The writer Danny Shapiro said that the advent of commercial DNA testing was the end of family secrets. Maybe you guys know her book, Family Secrets. I think that even before that, the advent of the internet and search engines was the beginning of the end of my family's secrets regarding slavery, at least. About 25 years after that conversation with my grandfather, on my birthday, I Googled, because all of a sudden now I could Google stuff, where when I started this history, there was no Google, there was no internet. So I did a little Google, little birthday, gift to myself of the information that my grandfather had given me. The last name of his grandfather, my great-great-grandmother's name, the town they lived in, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and information popped up, a website popped up that was all about that town, Ocean Springs, and it was full of information about my ancestors. I couldn't believe it. This was the town where my dad was born, his grandmother was born, his father was born, and his great-grandmother. So this was the place to look, and I hit a little jackpot. It had information about my ancestors, including a newspaper account that said that my great-great-grandmother Tempe had been given to Colonel Stewart and his wife Elizabeth as a wedding gift. It also had a newspaper account that confirmed something my grandpa had told me all those years ago, which was that the Colonel Stewart's wife could not have any children. This newspaper account said that as well. It also had a picture of my ancestors. All of them. It included my great-great-grandmother, Tempe. She was in the middle of the photo. Behind her was my great-great-grandfather, Colonel Stewart. Next to him was his wife. And then on either side of Tempe were two biracial-looking girls. Looked like they could very well be her daughters and his daughters. The picture also mirrored my interracial family. My husband is white. We have two daughters. That's the nice thing, but it also mirrored the sexual violence foundational to slavery. here's where things got really complicated for me. The picture was taken in the early 1890s. So that was 25 years after slavery ended. As a survivor of sexual assault myself, I couldn't understand why Tempe would pose for what really amounted to a family portrait with people who had taken her freedom. And that photo just sucked me in even further. I had to find out what the story was, and I had to find out also who these people in the photo were and what their stories were, my relatives. So from that picture, from the information from the historian in Ocean Springs, and then our favorite destination now, Ancestry, from the Ancestry message boards, I was able to find another descendant of Tempe in the Colonel, a distant cousin, my cousin Monique, who just so happened to also live in New Jersey, about 40 minutes from me. She just so happened to also be obsessed with our family's history, just so happened to also be married to a white man, just so happened to also have 2 daughters. When we got together for the first time, we all just sort of stood looking at each other, because our daughters look more like sisters than very distant cousins. My cousin Monique and I look nothing alike, but our kids, it was uncanny how similar they looked. So there's our human family, right? She contacted me through the Ancestry message boards because she had also found that picture. So that picture brought us together. And I also like to say that she contacted me the day that I got back from my grandmother's funeral in New Orleans. And so that felt very much like a blessing, like my grandmother saying goodbye as well as hello. It's very, very beautiful to me. And it was also June, which is nice because now it's June, and now June is Freedom Month, in my opinion. So we started getting together. We started, making play dates for our daughters, which were really research dates for us. And we, almost immediately started finding information about our great-great-grandfather, Colonel Stewart. Monique found a scabbard that had belonged to him, which we thought maybe would have had something to do with his Civil War service. He did serve in the Civil War, but the scabbard was more of like a fraternal order. Part of his uniform for his fraternal order. We found a stained glass window that had been dedicated to him. Apparently he was very active in his church in Ocean Springs, the town where my dad had grown up. We found his family's papers archived in a university in Mississippi. And of course we found records of his slave holdings, including newspaper ads where he was selling his plantation, the enslaved people who worked there, slave schedules, and a slave ship manifest that incidentally actually named the enslaved people, which I appreciated because I could at least honor them in some way, knowing their names and speaking their names, which I have done at certain sacred places. And wonderfully, gloriously, finally, we started finding information about our enslaved ancestors. We connected with a group called Afrogenius, an online community for genealogists researching African American history. And through Afrogenius, we found probably one of the dearest, most cherished discoveries that we made together, which was an ad that Tempe published in the Southwestern Christian Advocate, a Black Methodist Episcopal newspaper, where she was looking for the family that she'd been separated from through slavery. It was heartbreaking, and it was beautiful that freedom came, and on her mind was finding her people. Also, it was a gift to me because she named her people. So now I found a whole generation of my ancestors. She named her mother, Eliza. She named her sisters. Oh my goodness. Polly, Nancy, Liberia, a brother, Alfred, aunts, Peggy Manroe and Betty Matthews. I mean, that was amazing, and it still kind of bowls me over. Also, you know, I had been a newspaper reporter, so that the newspaper was her means of looking for her family, and that the newspaper was then the means of me finding that family. It was very poignant to me, and like another kiss from my ancestors. And it's a full circle. So we all were found through this need to be connected to one another. Our people were found across space and time. So that was just one of the most wonderful things that happened for me. And back to that picture. So that picture was like a beacon, light, just like the truth can be, calling people. We found, through that picture, we found another cousin who some of you may have met because she came to come into the table. Her name was Sylvia. And then we also found a linked descendant, someone who we were connected to through slavery, but not blood. The descendant of Elizabeth's family, who had enslaved my great-great-grandmother. My linked descendant was very gracious, giving me information that helped me further find, out about my family, including a copy of the will where Tempe is bequeathed, and an estate appraisal where she's valued at $1,600, along with her infant son, who was also Monique's, my cousin's great-great-grandfather. My linked descendant was instrumental in helping me discover what had happened to my great-grandmother, Josephine, the youngest child of Tempe and the Colonel. And he was also instrumental in us finding out a sad thing, something that had happened to one of Tempe and the Colonel's sons, that he was lynched. This information was something that, even though my father grew up in that town, he lived in that town, he never knew this information. And yet, our cousin Sylvia, whose family left Mississippi decades before, that family did know that information. And I share that because I think it's important that, my father, who was physically in that place, didn't know. I think there's a reason for that. I think that's psychic protection. I think that's bodily protection, And the family who was away in New York had all of this information because they're away, they're safe, right? So I just wanted to share that. And in my cousin Sylvia's family, this was not a rumor. This was the truth. It was known. Maybe you'll have this experience, right, where you have a cut and maybe you leave it a little too long and you try to put the alcohol on it or the antiseptic and it burns, it hurts. Or if you've broken a bone, to get it set, it hurts a lot, but it's necessary in order to heal. Healing is painful. This journey has been painful. It's also been really, really restorative. I say all of that to say that my connection with that linked descendant was really difficult and really, really necessary. And I want to honor both those tensions. They were just part of the story. Connecting with that linked descendant and all of the mixed feelings that I had, on the one hand, they were so helpful and well-meaning, and they were also really infuriating and entitled and condescending. All this stuff was happening. And I needed some help because I did want to continue to work with them, helping each other. I had records that I found in my research that were helpful to them too. So this was, a partnership. But it was also, there were some dynamics that really were not working for me. And my cousin wasn't interested in talking to these linked descendants. She was just like, F them and let's move on. But that didn't really quite work for me. I wanted to, for one reason, there are private records that they might have that I could not be privy to unless we were in relationship. That's just how it is. I wanted to have access to everything that I could. I didn't come all this way to not be able to see a possible family Bible or whatever. And also, I wanted to honor the fact that there was a lot of goodwill on their part, they didn't ever have to do any of the things that they had done. So there were both these things there. And so that's how I ended up here. As I was doing this work, I came across an article, I think it may have been in People magazine actually, about coming to the table, where Miss Phoebe is in that article, I think. And so I reached out, and the co-founder, Susan Hutchinson, reached back out to me, sent me an email responding to that first query. When I told her my story, she then put me in touch with Dave Patay, another person who was early on in this organization, a Unitarian minister. I mention that because I'm also a Unitarian, and descendant of an enslaver who was also in touch with his linked descendant, so it was very helpful to be able to talk with him honestly. She also put me in touch with Mom Shay, who was just a wonderful listener, someone who I could share all of my aggravations with, and who was so compassionate, and I just really appreciated that because it was such a very specific situation to be in that I really couldn't talk to a lot of people about, frankly. My family, my immediately family, could have cared less. They were just like, what are you doing? Go to the gym. What is wrong with you? Just forget it. Forget it. You have too much time on your hands, So after corresponding via phone and email for months with all of these wonderful people, I got to meet Susan and Dave and Mom Shay in person at the first national gathering held in Richmond, which Tom was mentioning. I also met Tom there, and Sharon Morgan, and many people that I'm seeing around here, Ian and Phoebe. And the people I met there were drawn to coming to the table because they had enslaved ancestors and wanted support uncovering their stories like me, or discovered that their ancestors had enslaved people, or they were descended from both. Some had family members who were also lynching victims, or perpetrators, or in one case, both victims and perpetrators. Still others were just acutely aware of slavery's unhealed legacy and wanted to come together with other folks working to heal the historic harm. Others were taking restorative actions, like sleeping in former slave dwellings to preserve and bring attention to them, saving cemeteries of enslaved people, and saw in coming to the table a kindred sense of purpose. And that's absolutely what I experienced at that first gathering that kept me involved here, was kindred spirit. What so inspired me was the ways members were working toward restitution personally. I met people who were on this same path. So like Joe McGill, who has the Slave Dwelling Project, Sharon Morgan, through our Black ancestry, creating this space where enslaving descendants could share information about people their family enslaved that would otherwise remain difficult, if not impossible, for descendants of the enslaved to access. Phoebe Kilby, creating a fund for the descendants of the people her family enslaved. So many people were also writing their families' histories to share, and other people were, like I said, saving cemeteries for the enslaved, or making private cemeteries where enslaved people were buried, like perhaps on their family's private property, open to the descendants of the enslaved. Some of these stories are captured in the anthology that I had the privilege of co-editing with Jill Strauss, Slavery's Descendants, and some of these stories are also standalone, their own books that you could also find too by coming to the table members. During that first gathering, I also had a chance to attend a workshop with Howard Zur, expert in restorative justice. I think some people might call him the father of restorative justice here in the United States. And he asked us, what would reparations look like to each of us? I had never been asked that before. I'd never thought about that before. Reparations was always posed as this impossibility, or this behemoth that the government would or would never decide. Always shot down before the conversation could even get started. Even though it's not a new concept, since the earliest days of the Republic, enslaved people have sought redress. The earliest instance in 1783, when the Massachusetts General Assembly approved Belinda Royall's request for a pension from the proceeds of her former enslaver's estate. So we can, it's just if we have the will. And we can learn from this past, from Belinda Royall, in order to move forward. So what would justice look like for me? I thought about that, and I thought perhaps some public recognition of the violent and criminal way my great-grand-uncle Warren was lynched. And that looks like the kind of work that a place like EJI is doing now. That's actually what they do. perhaps recompense for the property that my great-great-grandmother bought after emancipation, but 2 generations later was somehow lost. Perhaps free and perpetual health care to tend to the high toll on body, mind, and spirit of being Black in America. And then there's all the ways that so many members are also working to think about restoration and reparation nationally as well. And I think it's important that while there are personal ways of addressing reparations, it was a communal harm, so it has to be a communal care too. So this is the first time that the Come to the Table national gathering is in California, which is the first state in the U.S. to pass a law to study and develop proposals for reparations. And just last week, New York became the second. And my home state of New Jersey has a bill that's been languishing. So an organization called the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice has decided to proceed without the state, and will create a task force themselves. And that's kind of how we are in Jersey. Yeah, we just get stuff done. Slave labor was very important to New Jersey's economy, and our state was once called the slave state of the North. New Jersey was the last northern state to abolish slavery. It did not ratify the 13th Amendment until after the Civil War ended in 1866. So that's even after the last slaves in Texas learned they were free on Juneteenth. And that's how important slavery was to New Jersey. While my ancestors weren't enslaved in New Jersey, this process of recovering their stories did teach me a lot about northern slavery and slavery in New Jersey. Shortly after attending that first national gathering in Richmond, Joe McGill invited me to sleep in a slave dwelling in Greenwich, Connecticut, along with some other Coming to the Table members as part of his project to bring attention to these historic and sacred spaces. That slave dwelling where we slept was in an attic because often, as is the case in northern plantations, enslaved people slept in the same house with their enslavers, oftentimes in the attic. So on my way home from that sleepover, to get to my house, I had to pass my town's historical society, now called History Center. And I looked up into the attic, and I wondered if maybe slaves had once slept there too. I realized just how little I knew about my town's history. I would come to find out that one of the founding families of my town, the Cranes, enslaved people, including James Howe, the first African-American property owner in our town. The house that James Howe owned was bequeathed to him from Nathaniel Crane, the town founder. And it still stands tucked into the Watch on the Mountains like a beacon. It is one of the oldest homes in Montclair. And about a year ago, when that house was about to be sold, a group of concerned citizens, much like yourselves, came together, formed what is now a nonprofit, Friends of the Howe House, and they bought the house to keep it as a sacred site. That's a repair. Yeah. And that house, the Howe House, became a totem to me as I finished writing this book. I would make some pilgrimages there, just walk over there, just kind of like a touchstone and a blessing that it remained. My enslaved great-great-grandmother, Tempe, was also a property owner, but her home sadly no longer stands, but her story remains. I know the branches that sprouted from her roots. I've touched the soil where she lived, and the Gulf waters where her spirit still flows. I've said her name and heard echoed back to me, Ashe. At that first national gathering, we poured libation. I don't know if that's the first time I did that in community, if that was the first place I said with other people, Ashe. But now I do that every day as a part of my spiritual practice based on African indigenous spirituality, another gift of my ancestors that I've reclaimed. All of these reclamations and reparations come out of being in community with people who want to reclaim and repair too. If healing could happen at home, I'd stay home and do it. That's not how it happens. Healing happens in community. And it's messy, and it's uncomfortable, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful. We need one another to do this work of reclaiming our stories, healing, and repairing. Thank you for embracing me in 2010 when I first came here dubious and confused. Thank you for doing this sacred work with so much care, commitment, and grace. Thank you for being kind to one another when you're awkward, when you make a mistake. We're going to. We continue. Thank you for listening. If it's okay, I should have said I want to close by reading something very short from my book, if that's okay. It's just the prologue. Is that all right? Do you have time?
Of course. Please.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. My prologue is called A Relation. If you are going to look for your enslaved ancestors, you will have to look for the people who enslaved them. Any African American can expect that 19% of their ancestors were white men. So the enslavers might also be your relatives. This is a study in contrasts. Shadow, light, black, white, joy, pain, victim, perpetrator. You will find ephemera, editorials, photographs, wedding announcements, and atrocities. Lynched uncles, your people as property in someone's will, deed, or mortgage guarantee. You will also find the living, third cousins once removed, fifth cousins straight up, and descendants of the family that forced your family into slavery. You will meet them on beaches, in dusty archives, and farmhouses, scratching at the past like it is a lotto game, and you are strokes away from a million more reasons to believe. For a time, you will cease to believe in or pray to God, and instead will pray to your ancestors, the enslaved ones, the women, because they are what you want to be. Mother, creator, feminine, divine. They were raped. They were sold away. They kept on living. Some even thrived. If you are going to look for your enslaved ancestors, you will have to reconsider the word lucky. In 1858, when Colonel W.R. Stewart, a wealthy Louisiana cotton broker, married Elizabeth Macaulay, a girl from a long line of North Carolina plantation owners, her family gave the couple a slave named Timpey Burton as a wedding gift. Elizabeth was sickly and couldn't have children, but Timpey could, and did, have 6 of them with her new master, the Colonel. My great-grandmother Josephine, born a decade after slavery ended, was their youngest child. On my 38th birthday, I found their picture on the internet. It was May 7, 2007, and with all those 7s, I'd like to tell you that I was feeling lucky. Timpey was in the middle of the photo. Her former masters, Elizabeth and the Colonel, were sitting behind her. On either side of Timpey were 2 biracial-looking girls. The one on the left was curly-haired and creamy-skinned like my dad and my daughters. It was eerie how this century-old photo of my ancestors mirrored the new family I'd created. Lucky and unlucky number 7. In 7 days, God made the world. In 7 plagues, God could wipe it out. On the 7th of May, I was born. In my 7th year, I was raped. It's been said that it takes 7 years for every cell in your body to change. In the 7 years after finding the family photo, I crisscrossed the country, uncovering the stories of the people in it, and a breach began to mend in me. There is a name for this kind of pilgrimage. The Akan of Western Africa call it Sankofa, symbolized by a bird in flight with its head craned backward and an egg in its beak. Sankofa means to go back and get it, or it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. Thank you.
Wow, huh? We do have time for some questions. If anybody has any questions for Dionne about her journey, her pilgrimage, the writing process, she's expert at all of it. Anybody have any questions? Yes?
I'd love for you just to give a couple more sentences just about how this process healed something inside of you. You referred to it a number of times in your talk, and that was just so extraordinary. Expand on that.
The question is to expand just a little bit on the healing part of her journey. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, it did take the whole book really to delve into all of that because there were many things to heal. But I think generally, I think for me, learning about the specifics to the degree that I was able to find them about my great-great-grandmother Tempe was just very healing, I feel like so often slaves are treated as this monolith, and their lives, the particularities, their humanity is not considered, and so it was very empowering for me to learn anything that I could about Tempe, to consider the decisions she would have been faced with, to also think about that while she was certainly enslaved, she had an internal life that she was in charge of. And what that would have looked like, I found out that she was very religious. Several ministers attended her funeral. And so that spoke to me, how she made decisions about her spiritual life, how she would pray, what that might have looked like. Methodism, she was a Methodist Episcopal, and that was our family's religion, my father's family religion. And, I often thought about that as, it turns out that was my enslaver, my great-great-grandfather's too, and I always thought about it from his side, but it's like, wait a minute, no, that was also her side. And then I found out that, an enslaved woman was one of the first Methodists in this country, Betty. So it was, really empowering for me to learn and just think about the different decisions she would have had to have made, how those continue to affect me today. And also it just lifted me up to know how long she lived. She lived into her hundreds, And, I don't think you persevere long without some serious sense of yourself. So, yeah, that just really, that inspired me to think about that.
Yes, Anne?
Thank you so much. What a beautiful presentation. Oh my gosh, I really enjoyed this. I'm doing my own search still. I know you mentioned some contention and some pain and some annoyance in your journey. Has that become more resolved? Has there been any more enlightenment maybe in the part of other people that has helped heal that relationship, or are you just sort of going on with your?
You know,
Did everybody catch the question?
No.
okay, so the question was if, you know, I mentioned strife, difficulties, contention in the relationship with my linked descendant you're speaking of, right? And so Anne wanted to know if there has been any resolution or, right?
Healing.
Healing. There you go.
And they
Healing.
come to the table.
No. So I feel very resolved with that relationship, and I do definitely feel very grateful, like I said, for the information and for the sharing, because that was really important. But I don't really have a relationship with them. I do, however, have a relationship with other, you know, a couple of different linked descendants that, funny enough, really isn't around our ancestry. It's because when we met, we found out that we had things in common, like art, stuff that we just like. And she's really not that interested in all this, so that's fine. So healing, I don't know if we really had enough of a relationship for that to even be something that was necessary. So I don't know, maybe more to be revealed with that. I think there has been some awareness on their part, but there's never been any like coming back to me to say, you know, I thought about this. No, and that's okay. I don't really need that. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good, and I think all the people who needed to find each other found each other. And I think for that time we got what we needed, and so yeah, I'm
That just
good.
makes me sad, because coming from the other side, I'm really yearning for finding someone like you know, and really being able to be family.
Absolutely, and like I said, you know, not the people I was researching with, but other members of the family, I do feel a very nice relationship with, and there were other people who I didn't talk about, who I have a very good relationship. We're not necessarily linked, but you know, they are in these spaces too. So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, it's good.
Maybe one more? Or not? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any advice to linked descendants about establishing these kinds of relationships?
Do I have any advice about to linked descendants about establishing these relationships? Yeah, I think I do. I think, you know, I think curiosity, leading with curiosity, is great. I think just asking folks what, you know, might work is really, really helpful. I think a lot of the difficulty did happen because there were lots of assumptions, as opposed to talking to us, the, you know, descendants of this enslaved woman, about what would work for us, you know, what we wanted to know, what, you know, that kind of thing. So I think, like, yeah, just curiosity, open communication as much as possible, you know. Always asking first, because also someone might not be ready today, you know, to engage, but maybe later, you know. And if you're asked, there's probably more of a chance that later, you know, you'll be receptive. So yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dionne.